Our Around the World segment tonight, a suspected bomb was detonated outside the U.S. Embassy in Manila on Monday. 2 men were arrested shortly thereafter, and Philippine authorities say the men have ties to a radical Islamist terror group. 3 other men suspected of being involved evaded authorities and are still on the loose. Joining me now is former U.S. diplomat Jim Jatras. Jim, good to see you.
Thank you, Liz. Good to see you.
Jim, we hear from Philippine authorities that they say these men have links to Islamic terrorism, but what evidence do they have that this actually is involved with an outside group and not just an individual?
Well, there have been 2 other bombings notably in the last few weeks. There was one last week against an advance team belonging to President Rodrigo Duterte, and there was one on September 2nd in the city of Davao, where Duterte had formerly been mayor. And the methodology is the same, according to the director of the National Police, Ronald de la Rosa, that the kind of bomb that was used, made out of a mortar shell, is similar in all 3 cases. So they think there's a strong connection among these bombings.
Right, and that part, I think we've been getting conflicting reports too. The Philippine authorities, some of them say that what was found in that garbage can outside the embassy was just junk. Others say it was an improvised explosive device, specifically a cell phone connected to red wires was placed in the trash can. And that, I assume, is what you're talking about as being similar to the methodology of the other attacks.
That's right. And again, this is sort of the calling card of this group called Maute, which is based on the island of Mindanao, which is the larger southern island, which is an affiliate of ISIS. And that, I think, is the real concern, that there is, this is part of a broader international movement that they now have on their doorstep in the Philippines.
Right, and let me ask you this then. If it was placed outside of the embassy, a little bit away, a few blocks away from the U.S. Embassy, was this specifically targeting Americans? Because there were some reports that they tried unsuccessfully to place this bomb in a park nearby, and then their secondary choice was this embassy. Was it against Americans?
It's not clear yet whether it is or whether just having it near the embassy is something to try to have an impact on the U.S. relationship with the Philippines. Let's keep in mind the relationship between President Obama and President Duterte is not very good at all. And maybe they see some opportunity to keep that disruption going. I think with President Trump coming in, I understand Mr. Duterte was going to be coming here in Washington for the inauguration. I think there's a chance there'll be much closer cooperation between the United States and the Philippines, which, of course, is a long-standing relationship, and maybe it could be directed against that. But I think we should see it as part of a broader terrorist assault on the Philippines.
Right, and the Philippines, as we remember, they're in the midst of a bloody war on drugs right now. It's not a peaceful place. There's even talk of suspending habeas corpus, of implementing martial law. They're experiencing attacks from many sides right now. Jim, let me ask you about this relationship between President Duterte and President Obama, and then the relationship potentially between the Philippine president and President-elect Trump here. You know, we've talked about this before, the joint exercises between the Philippines and the United States were canceled because of the bad relations between Obama and Duterte. Do you expect those to be re-implemented under President Trump?
I do, and I think really with regard to President Obama and Duterte, it's nobody likes to be lectured. Nobody wants to be told how to run his country. Now, look, they call Mr. Duterte the Donald Trump of the Philippines. He's plain talking, tough acting, sometimes in ways that we would consider here to be a little bit over the top, but seem to be rather popular in the Philippines. I think Mr. Trump can respect that kind of strong personality more than Mr. Obama, who has this kind of school-marmish law professor manner about him that he gets to instruct everybody. I don't think Mr. Trump's going to act like that. At least I hope he won't.
Right, and I think over the top, that might even be a little bit of an understatement when we're talking about President Duterte here. He is the one who suggested the death penalty for drug dealers. But Jim, let me change topics on you, ask you about the relationship that the United States is going to have in some other areas of conflict now that President-elect Trump has announced that General Mattis will be his defense secretary. How is that going to impact our relationship with nations that we're currently in conflict with around the world?
Well, I think the important thing to keep in mind with General Mattis is that he is a professional soldier. He's a plain-spoken man as well. I guess that makes him a natural for Mr. Trump. I think he's going to have to take his lead from President Trump in having an America First, national interest-based policy. Mr. Trump has said he wants to improve our relations with Russia, work with the Russians on solving the Syrian problem. I think General Mattis is going to have to take his cue from that. We still have the big question coming up about Iran. There's obviously a lot of concern about the nuclear deal and whether or not that's going to continue, although General Mattis has said as much as he thought it was a bad deal, that it's not going to go away. It's a fact of international life right now.
Right. Maybe stronger on the Iran deal would be General Flynn, who has President Obama's ear at all time. But Jim, let me just speak plainly here. In your opinion, was General Mattis a good pick for Defense Secretary?
I think it's a good pick for Mr. Trump. I think it's somebody that he would be able to work with, assuming that as a general, he knows that he's not the president that Mr. Trump is.
Right. So we'll have to see then. What do you foresee happening in Syria under the head of a President Trump with a national security advisor of Mike Flynn and then a defense secretary of General Mattis? I mean, both General Mattis and General Flynn are very outspoken about Islamic terror, about the situation in Syria. And we heard what President-elect Trump said during the campaign, that he wanted to bomb the heck out of them.
That's right. And I think Mr. Trump has made it very clear that he considers destroying, not just containing, but destroying the Islamic State a #1 priority. And the only way you can do that, the only way you can take on radical Islamic terror, the three words that Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama didn't want to say, is to defeat them in Syria and in Iraq. But that means you can't do that and also overthrow the Assad government. And as Mr. Trump pointed out, Assad is fighting against the Islamic State. The Russians are fighting against the Islamic State. Even the Iranians are fighting against the Islamic State. You've got to choose a side here, and if you don't want the terrorists to win, that means, in effect, Assad is going to have to win. And I think more people are understanding that he's not going to be overthrown. So let's work with that and see where we can go with it.
Right, you can't have it both ways, and at least that battle might be a secondary one down the road. Jim, we're out of time, but thank you so much for being here today. It was great to talk to you. All right, guys, what do you think? Let us know, as usual, on Twitter, Liz_Wheeler. Meantime, we'll be right back.